been doom-scrolling financial headlines lately, you've probably seen some genuinely terrifying numbers thrown around, usually accompanied by a lot of shouting. Is the US actually broke? Are we headed for total financial collapse? Well, today, we're going to peel back the layers of the US national debt crisis. But we're doing it differently. We are stepping entirely away from the partisan fear-mongering and the political spin. Instead, we're just looking at the pure, unvarnished data and figuring out what it actually means for your wallet.
Section 1. A $34 trillion mistake.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really grasp the scale of this situation, let's just strip away the massive, incomprehensible macroeconomic zeros for a second. Imagine a theoretical household right down your street. This family earns a respectable $50,000 a year. But here's the catch. They're spending $70,000 every single year. And they're already sitting on an overwhelming $370,000 in debt. Now, a rational household would aggressively cut their spending, right? But not this one. Instead of cutting back, they just keep opening brand new credit cards simply to pay the interest on the old ones. It's this fast-paced, urgent treadmill that literally never stops.
But here's the dramatic reality. That is not a hypothetical household. That is the exact current fiscal path of the United States government. $34 trillion. We are currently facing an unsustainable debt trajectory that projects our national debt-to-GDP ratio to hit approaching 120% within just a decade. To put that into perspective, that completely surpasses the record debt levels set right after World War II. But unlike the post-World War II era, which was rescued by a massive global economic boom, we're heading straight into an aging workforce. That means fewer young workers paying taxes to support the system, coupled with a generally slowing trajectory of economic growth.
Section 2. The Big Three Entitlements. To really understand the massive drivers of this exploding debt, we've got to look under the hood at the actual machinery behind it. We have to talk about what are known as the Big Three: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, looking at this neutrally, it's absolutely crucial to understand that these aren't just simple line items you can easily cross out or cut. They represent the bedrock of the American social contract. They're the safety net that millions of citizens rely on every single day.
And this brilliantly illustrates the issue. When you combine these Big Three entitlement programs with the interest payments on our existing debt, they quietly and consistently consume a massive 60% of all federal spending. That is the heart of the mathematical problem we face, because that leaves just 40% of the pie for literally everything else the government does. We're talking infrastructure, education, defense, scientific research, you name it. It's a massive crowding out effect that severely limits our ability to invest in the future.
Section 3. The Coming Interest Trap.
Which brings us to a rapidly accelerating problem. We need to talk about the terrifying math of our future interest obligations, because they are acting exactly like a snowball rolling down a very steep hill. The Congressional Budget Office released a projection that gives us a massive mental benchmark here. By the early 2030s, which, by the way, is really not that far away, the pure borrowing costs of the United States are projected to entirely eclipse the entire U.S. defense budget. Think about that staggering comparison for a second. We'll be spending more just to service our past debt than we spend on our entire military apparatus.
So, the crucial point is this deeply unsettling figure. For every single dollar the government borrows over the next 10 years, a staggering 66 cents will go solely toward paying interest on past debt. Wrap your head around that. We aren't just borrowing to build for the future anymore, we are aggressively borrowing simply to pay for the past.
Section 4. Intergenerational theft and inflation.
Let's pivot away from the macro data for a minute and talk about the personal impact, because all of these massive numbers eventually find their way directly into your wallet. Now, some economists suggest we can simply print money and kind of inflate our way out of this massive deficit. But inflation acts as a stealth tax. When unpredictable, rising prices erode your purchasing power, it acts as a silent wealth drain on the middle class. In fact, the data shows that a permanent 1% deficit increase creates price pressures equal to a $16,000 cumulative loss per household over 30 years. That is literally wealth quietly evaporating right out of your bank account.
And this brings us to a highly charged perspective on the situation. NYU professor Scott Galloway bluntly refers to our current fiscal path as, quote, massive intergenerational theft. Now, while that's certainly an intense framing, it perfectly captures the growing generational friction at play regarding who exactly is going to pay for the safety net when the bill inevitably comes due.
This friction is incredibly obvious when we look at Generation Z. For Gen Z, this is shaping up to be a defining generational test. Many are entering the workforce feeling, quite frankly, like the nation's personal ATM. They're paying heavily into systems they fear they may never fully benefit from, all while watching the government actively reduce its investments in the things that would actually build their future. Things like infrastructure, affordable housing, and climate resilience. The math simply doesn't leave room for forward-looking investments anymore.
Section 5. The painful solutions ahead. So how do we actually fix this? We need to get very serious here for a second, because when you look at history and economic theory, the ways out of this trap are incredibly harsh. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is that we're essentially looking at 3 bitter pills we might be forced to swallow. History and current financial thought leaders generally point to these 3 radical directions: the WWI route, the Japan route, or something called the beastly bill.
Let's neutrally unpack the mechanics of these routes. After World War II, we literally grew our way out through a combination of a turbocharged 3.6% GDP growth and top marginal tax rates that hit an astonishing 94%. Today, some people are really hoping artificial intelligence might trigger a similar massive productivity boom to save us. Alternatively, we have the Japan route. This is a path of secular stagnation, meaning a prolonged period of little to no economic growth, where the central bank simply buys up 50% of the debt to keep interest rates artificially at zero. Finally, we have the beastly bill. This is a radical plan proposed by billionaire Paul Tudor Jones to fix a $900 billion gap. His fairly uncomfortable solution involves brutal 6% across-the-board cuts to all programs, combined simultaneously with higher top tax rates and brand new wealth taxes.
Now you might be wondering, if things are really this dire, why isn't everything totally collapsed yet? Well, it's because of what economists call exorbitant privilege. This is the unique benefit the United States enjoys simply because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. Because the rest of the globe inherently needs dollars to conduct international trade, this privilege gives the US significantly more time and flexibility than other nations to carry massive debt. But the yellow warning lights are absolutely flashing brightly on the dashboard right now, because while we do have more time, time is certainly not infinite. The simple, unavoidable mathematical truth here is that the status quo will end. The current path must break. Whether that break comes in the form of drastically higher taxes, painful entitlement reform, or a market-driven mini-crisis, change is undeniably coming. For anyone holding assets, diversification and inflation protection are no longer just smart, nice-to-have strategies. They are absolute survival tools in an economy that is fundamentally shifting beneath our feet.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question. If you are part of the generation or generations that will inevitably be paying this massive bill, what is your move? I really want to hear your thoughts on this, so let me know down in the comments. And if you want to explore how a major economy actually survives using that second option we discussed, the Japan route, make sure to catch our next explainer where we dive deep into exactly why their economy hasn't collapsed yet. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.